So today, Master Tsongkhapa, the great Master Tsongkhapa, 600th death anniversary, in connection with which we have this international conference on the tradition of Master Tsongkhapa. Conference of scholars. So, having studied the writings of Tsongkhapa, that you have gained faith in him through understanding the Dharma, based on reason. So for a few thousand years, there have been different religious traditions that have evolved in the world. Amongst them, the Indian religious traditions becomes the most important, which have the practices of calm abiding and penetrative insight. So this tradition of calm abiding or single-pointed concentration and analytical meditation has been there in the Indian tradition for over 3,000 years. So amongst them, Buddhism is one of Indian tradition. So since Buddhism first, Buddha came, the teaching of the Buddha seems to be still needed in the world. Of course, different religious traditions are necessary and relevant in the world today, when we have lots of problems around the world. Although there are even killings in the name of religion, but the main message of all these religious traditions is love and compassion. Even with regard to the theistic religious traditions, those who believe in Creator God, everything, all the creatures are created by God, and that God is seen as in the nature of love and compassion. And so, thinking along this line, that such an infinite love, a God, has created us, we can see these religions also are relevant in today's world. So whether it's the theistic religious traditions or non-theistic religious traditions like Buddhism, love and compassion are something that are necessary in our world. So we are in the 21st century today. So these different religious traditions, which are thousands of years old, are still extant amongst us. There are people who criticize religion. There are people who are indifferent to religion. Many of them. So I usually say that there are 7 billion people on this earth, amongst whom, we can divide these 7 billion people on this earth into 3. Those which are who believe in religion, those who criticize, and those who are indifferent to religion. So those people who are indifferent to religion, just remaining neutral. But if you compare the believers and the non-believers, the atheists, we can more or less say that those who believe in the religion have more peace of mind than those who reject and criticize religion. So it seems that people who believe in religion have greater peace of mind, however small that may be. And then, so though all human beings have the same brain, human brain, but if we compare the believers and those who criticize religion, whatever philosophical background they may have, the religious people, believers may have, they at least have some kind of compassion and love towards others. So today, with regard to nonviolence and compassion, these are needed in today's world. So all sentient beings on this earth have the three poisons of attachment, anger, or hatred, and ignorance. But war or battles only happen amongst humans. Taking sides into groups and combating wars against other groups exists amongst human beings only. So though we should have had enough of violence, having indulged in violence so much over the last many centuries, but even today, people are selling weapons to others, and these are also, in a way, contributing to violence in the world. And therefore, love and compassion is today very necessary in human world. And scientists even today say that the basic human nature is compassionate. They say we are social animals or social beings. So we have to depend on the society or the community we live in, and we also should feel close to the people or the beings in our community. And so for our survival as social animals or beings, we have to depend on our community. And amongst the religions, there are two camps, one theistic and the other non-theistic. So with regard to non-theistic religious traditions, there are those of the non-theistic Sankhya school, and then Jainism and Buddhism. So regarding Buddhism, the Buddha himself has said that you are your own master. Therefore, there is no talk about creator God as such. Whereas the theistic followers of the theistic religions rely on God. They pray to God when they face problems. And so, there are many people who believe in religious traditions, and particularly there are those who do not believe in a creator God, but believe that because of our change in our mind, we create pain or pleasure, and therefore they talk about transforming our mind in relation to psychology. So training the mind is what they talk about. And so there is a new found interest in this kind of tradition as well. Buddhism originated in India, and the Buddha turned what are known as the three wheels of Dharma. According to Sandhi Nimochana Sutra, there are three turning of the wheels of Dharma. And within the first teaching, the Buddha gave teaching on how we enter into samsaric existence through our karma and delusions, and how we exit out of samsara through the path and attaining cessation. And so, as to how the different destructive emotions arise in us, and thereby leading us to samsara, and regarding the true cessation, we need to see if cessation, true cessation, is possible or not to attain. So it is said that by eliminating our destructive emotions, we will be able to attain the true cessation within ourselves. So the Nalanda Sanskrit tradition of Buddhism does not resort only to scriptural authority, but we resort to logic and reason. Of course, Pali tradition of Buddhism also is great, but they more or less resort to scripture rather than reason and logic. Whereas in the Nalanda tradition, the Sanskrit tradition of Buddhism, following the Buddha's statement where he says, "O monks and scholars, just as gold is tested through burning, cutting and rubbing, likewise you should examine my teaching and then accept it, and not because you have devotion to me." So in other words, Buddha has said that even if some teachings were given by himself, if they go against reason, they should not be taken literally. And so through our critical analysis of the teaching of the Buddha, if we find some contradiction in his statement, in his words, we should not take that teaching on the face value. That's what the Buddha has said. So Buddhism from India, where it originated, spread to China, and then Tibet, Mongolia, and there are few republics within the Russian Federation, and then also Vietnam, China, Vietnam, Korea, and Japan. So these countries follow the Nalanda Buddhist, Nalanda Sanskrit Buddhist tradition. So this Sanskrit tradition, which have come down to us through masters like Nagarjuna and his disciples, also spread first from India to China, and then later in Tibet to Tibet. So it may sound like being that I'm attached out of my attachment to Tibet. I sometimes say that when Songtsen Gampo, the 33rd Tibetan king, wanted to devise a Tibetan writing, he found the Chinese letters too complicated, and therefore he wanted to devise a new writing system for Tibetans, and therefore he chose as a model some Indian script, and devised and started a new Indian Tibetan writing based on the Devanagari alphabet. And then in the 8th century, Master Chandra, the great abbot, came to Tibet, and he advised the Tibetans to translate the Buddhist scriptures into Tibetan, so that without having to rely on Sanskrit or Pali or other Indian languages, the Tibetans could, in fact, study Buddhism through their own language, in their own language. So some people have told me that when Master Abbot Chandrakshita came to Tibet, he went to Tibet, he was around in his 70s, and then he lived to about 90 years of age. Although in our traditional texts, sometimes people say that he lived 900 years, but I don't believe that. So after coming to Tibet, the Samye monastic complex was founded. And within that complex, the Abbot Chandra also started the translation bureau. So, since though there were already some Chinese meditators, since the time of 33rd Tibetan King Je Tsongkhapa, and because of that, the department of concentration was also instituted within the Samye monastic tradition. And so Chandra Cheeta introduced the teaching of the Buddha, the Nalanda tradition in Tibet, which uses logic and reason. And as a result, later Tibetan scholars like Chaba Je Tsongkhapa and Master Sakya Pandita have also written texts on logic. And then the Indian classic texts on logic and epistemology, written by Dignaga and Dharmakirti, were also translated into Tibetan. So all the texts. And then in Tibetan tradition, the Sakya tradition used to have a very good tradition of studying through logic and debate. And because of that, Gyaltsab Tamarinchen was said to have attended a teaching that was being given by Master Tsongkhapa in order to criticize and challenge Tsongkhapa. So when he reached that place, it was said that he went straight ahead and sat on the same throne as Tsongkhapa, on the side of the Master Tsongkhapa's seat. And so, as if indicating that he was going to have a debate with Tsongkhapa. And Je Rinpoche, the Tsongkhapa himself, didn't really look at him, just ignored, continued giving his teaching. And because during that teaching, Tsongkhapa gave such a profound teaching, Gyaltsab Rinpoche, or the Dharma Rinchen, at that point, he took off his hat. Before that, he put on his hat very proudly. But then, as he found the profundity, saw the profundity of Tsongkhapa's teaching, he took off his hat and then paid his respect to Master Tsongkhapa. So, due to the greatness of Master Tsongkhapa's teaching, such great scholar as Gyaltsab Tamarinchen bowed to him. And at the end of a prayer to the 6 ornaments and for 2 supreme masters that we usually say, we also say a verse praising Jigten Rendawa and Master Tsongkhapa, and also Lodin Sherab. And so, because Rendawa was said to have been so, left a legacy for study of the Madhyamaka, the middle way philosophy, there used to be the saying that one actually thinks of meditation while going, sitting, and lying. So there were masters of Nyingma such as Rongsompa and Rongsom Pandita and Longchen Rabjampa. From the Nyingma tradition, they were really great scholars, top scholars. And then later, during the new translation school phase of dissemination of the Buddha Dhamma in Tibet, we have this Gagyu and Sakya tradition, and then Kadam tradition. And later, within the Kadam tradition, there are the 3 Kadam traditions or lineages. which are called the Katam Shungbawa, Lamrimpa, and Mengakpa. The scholastic Katam tradition, the graduated path, and the pith instruction Katam. So Je Rinpoche was never satisfied with just pith instructions, the so-called pith instructions. But Je Rinpoche studied extensively, and all the Tibetan Buddhist traditions that were extant at the time. From Lodar Drupchen Namkha Gyaltsen, he learned about Nyingma tradition. Although Je Tsongkhapa himself had visions of his meditation deities, but he emphasized the study of classic great texts mainly. So at one point, Je Tsongkhapa also had the vision of Manjushri, and also Dr. Jambe Gyatso, one of his students, had visions of Manjushri. And Tsongkhapa received some instructions from Manjushri. And when Tsongkhapa complained that he had difficulty comprehending what Manjushri had taught him, Manjushri advised him to study further the classic texts, the great treatises. And then, having done all his studies, after he went into the solitude, he had a dream of Master Nagarjuna surrounded by his 5 disciples, and one of whom looked rather dark bluish in color, was said to have touched. They were having discussions on the profound view of emptiness. And this person who had a dark blue complexion was Buddha Palita. He touched his text, Buddha Palita commentary, on Tsongkhapa's head. And then the next morning, it was said that Tsongkhapa read this commentary by Buddha Palita, and it was said to have gained insight into the emptiness and the reality of dependent origination. And then with regard to secret mantrayana, Master Tsongkhapa emphasized mainly Guhyasamaja Tantra. So having gained experience, after having realized through logical inference and dispelled any doubts about the different points of practice, then he wrote the Madhyamaka texts, such as the commentaries on Master Nagarjuna's Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and commentary on the Chandrakirti's Madhyamaka Avatara, and so forth. And so I called Je Rinpoche the second Nagarjuna. So if you look at his writings, you'll be able to see how close he explicates the thought of Master Nagarjuna in accordance with Master Nagarjuna's intention. So Kyudo Rinpoche was sometimes, if you read his writings, you'll find him rather boastful about some of his interpretations, saying that I'm the only one who understands this and that. So I feel a little bit uncomfortable reading those. But Je Rinpoche never says such things. Is never boastful about his insights. So there are 18 volumes of writings by Master Tsongkhapa in his collected works, whereas in terms of number, Budun Rinchen Drup has more number of treatises. So I once saw a commentary by Budun Rinchen Drup on one of the texts written by Master Nagarjuna, which is called Bindavirthi, And I thought, oh, it must be a great text. I read it, and I didn't really found it to be that profound. And then there were Drukpema Karpo, master. He has also more number of volumes. But I didn't find much profound wisdom in his writings too. Whereas if you compare their writings with Je Tsongkhapa's writing, although he had only wrote 18 volumes, I mean, his writings are very profound and incredible. And then Je Tsongkhapa, after finding the Gaden Monastery, and his two disciples, Chamyang Cheche and Chamjin Cheche, finding the Drepung and Sera monasteries. And regarding the founder of the Sera monastery, Chamjin Cheche, he was a cook of Je Tsongkhapa in the past. So Je Rinpoche, of course, was invited by the Chinese emperor at that time, whom Tibetans called Jamyang Kongma, as if he was the Manjushri in person. Although Je Rinpoche received the invitation from the Emperor of China, he actually wrote that he was engaged in his meditation and retreat and so forth. Therefore, he wanted to send Chamjin Cheche. And Chamjin Cheche received, as an honor from the Chinese emperor, our black hat. And even after coming to exile, Sera Monastery in Balakopi, at one point was actually had kept that black hat on top of Chamjin Cheche's hat statue. And so I criticized them. I kind of teased them that they were considering the Chinese emperor's hat more important than the Buddha's monastic, discipline. And then they took it off, and later they didn't only use the yellow hat. And so in next year, around March, I will be going to Sera, Balakopi. So these great monastic institutions have been pivotal in keeping up and preserving the tradition of Buddhism, and particularly Master Tsongkhapa's tradition. So I had the opportunity to observe the debate in Drepung, Gomang, and Loseling, and also here in Shatse Monastery. So it's very good that we have still this tradition of keeping up with the tradition of Master Tsongkhapa through study and practice. So the great scholars, so these three monastic institutions, mainly the Sera, Drepung, and Gaden, have produced great scholars. They were Mongolian scholars in the past, and also from Amdo and so forth, who have left a great legacy in the tradition of Master Tsongkhapa. And then with regard to Tantra, Master Tsongkhapa wrote, of course, the great exposition of the secret mantra path, but the commentary on the 5 stages, which is called the bright illumination of illuminating lamp, is incredible. So if you look at his writings, I mean, you will actually see, as I call Je Tsongkhapa, the second Nagarjuna. So based on his writings, his wisdom, how many great scholars and practitioners have been produced throughout these centuries who have actually left legacy through teaching and spreading the teaching of the Buddha, the Master Tsongkhapa's tradition. So, personally speaking, I came from the same native place as Je Tsongkhapa. So, from his birthplace to my birth, from my birthplace to his birthplace, it'll take a day by horse, on horse. So, such a great master like Je Tsongkhapa, who has left great legacy for the Dharma. For me personally, his writings of Gombarapsel, which is the elucidation of the intention, a commentary on Maha Madhyamaka Avatara, and the Ocean of Reasoning, commentary on the Mula Madhyamaka Karika, and then the treatise differentiating the provisional and definitive meaning of sutras. These have been really helpful for me to gain insight into the Madhyamaka view. And with regard to the practice of altruism, bodhicitta, I have studied Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, written by Shantideva. As one of my teachers, Kundalama Tenzin Gyaltsen, has said, there has never been a greater text for the practice of bodhicitta than this text. So if you read the Master Tsongkhapa's writings on philosophical view of the Madhyamaka, I mean, you'll see how he actually links these ideas of Master Tsongkhapa that were taught in the Master Nagarjuna's writings. And so the transformation within myself has happened thanks to Master Tsongkhapa's writings and also his great treatise on the stages of the path as well, which of course quotes quite profusely from Master Chandideva's Bodhisattvacharya Avatar. So as Je Tsongkhapa himself makes this prayer to be able to spread the teaching where it is not spread before, and to be able to revive where it has spread but declined, out of moved by compassion. So, regardless of whether people are believers or non-believers, or Buddhist or not Buddhist, I have been trying my best to serve humanity. So, as being someone from the same nativity as Je Tsongkhapa, I have not let him down. So, this is what I wish to say about the greatness of Master Tsongkhapa.